So here we are, set out to make a color key for this value study that we just did. First, I just wanted to show you some examples of color keys. These are all ones I did in class for my class here at Noman. All of these were done in about 25 to 30 minutes. All from reference, of course. These are not just out of my head, but they are all very, very limited time frame and very simple technique. They may look a little bit finished to be done in 25 or 30 minutes, but if I zoom in here, you'll see that they are not finished at all. They're very, very loose, very graphic, and very simple. The values are super simple. You know, using custom brushes to achieve a texture effect to mimic the shot of the film or of the image that I was looking at. Some of them, this one probably even less time. This one maybe 15 minutes, judging by the fact that the brush strokes are so rushed and that there's no texture, and it's really just quick assessment of the values and color. And that's what you get. You get a realistic look isn't necessarily about detail. It's more about the accuracy of the values and the scale of the texture. So, you know, some depending, I kind of mix them up here. Some of them are a little bit more organic, and some of them are a little bit more hard surface looking. But they're all, you know, quick motion blur and a quick flip upside down, reflection, motion blur, line tool. Everything we've just covered, everything that I was talking about previously, is how these are done. You know, you make some lasso selections, flat value, very subtle gradient. I mean, if you really look at what this is, it's just a bunch of lasso selections and then some really messy lines to make something, you know, it looks like this whole wall was like a big abstract painting or something, is what I think what that's supposed to be. Conference room table, ambient lighting, you know, some nice reflection, from the values in the environment, and then some just subtle gradients, and it looks like it's done from far away. This is based on a painting. I believe it's an Albert Bierstadt painting. But yeah, this is even simpler. This isn't even using selections and layers. That's literally just using brush, and just getting the values right, getting the colors right, and getting the proportion of the shapes right. And then you zoom back out, and there you go. You get, you know, very accurate color, a very accurate representation of the color palette. You know, very subtle, not a lot used here. Maybe a little bit of lassoing, some custom brushes, some color dodge, a little bit of overlay, but honestly, most of it is just opaque painting. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do one of these. I'm not going to spend 25 minutes. I wish I could do it that fast, but from doing something out of your head, it's a little bit different. It's not just mimicking something that you're looking at. It's inventing some color. So based on the value study that I just did, I'm going to do a color key which we can then use in the next Noman video, Volume 2. I'm going to use to show you my 3D model, and I'm going to mimic those color that color palette in 3D. I'm going to recreate it, light it in 3D, and then the rest of it I will be doing in Photoshop. I'll be painting over, and honestly, after that, looking at that, you know, that might be the hard part. It might seem like it's the hard part, but I swear this whole thought process and design process is the hard part. Putting textures on and putting details on is the easy part. That's like meditation. Doing the design part and coming up with deciding on the composition, that's the hard part, I promise you. So yeah. So let's get going on this. Going to start up this timer. I'm actually going to be timing myself here. I want to see how long I actually spend. So let me just Here we go, all set up. So the great thing about this is that usually those color keys, the ones we were just looking at, none of these are with any photo textures or any. This is 100% painted. So this is starting from total scratch, from starting with blobs of color is the way these are done. The difference between that and this is that since this is a unique situation, because since I already did the value key and I already separated my layers out, I already have those blobs that I can use those selections to then fill it in and make some colors. So what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to get started and I'm going to start using those selections to block it out. Now, one thing is that the background generally, I mean, honestly, it sort of defines everything. The background definitely does. What I'm going to start with, I'm going to do this one a little bit differently. So I'm going to start with an overlay layer right now, and I'm going to use a gradient. I'm going to knock this into an atmosphere that I'm looking for. So how did I decide on these colors? Well, honestly, if you have, I personally like to steer away from photorealistic colors. I mean, if I wanted photorealistic colors in this piece, then I wouldn't be doing a painting. I would be just doing I would be doing 3D model using an HDR photo in my environment, getting super realistic lighting, rendering, and then throwing some photo textures over the top of it. I like my stuff to be a little bit more illustrative personally, so I'm not going to do it that way. I want some more painterly, more interesting colors than that. It's just my preference. A lot of people would disagree, but I don't think so. So, going to be doing it using more of an adjustment kind of method. Okay, so that's cool. So the cool thing about overlays, it'll affect your values as well. You can add saturation, you can darken, you can lighten, but you can't desaturate. It'll only add more saturation to what you've got going on. So that's cool. I'm going to want to add a little bit of warmth into this atmosphere here. Okay. Not worried about edges right now because I have my hard edges in these selections here. You know, as hard of edges as I'm ever going to need. So I'm really not concerned with that. So let's see here. I've got that going. I've got a little bit of warmth happening. Let's see if I can. Let's see if it's going to work for me to put that onto the light area. I don't know how that's going to turn out. Sometimes it's about selecting the right color and value because, like I said, you can lighten and you can darken. So you have to be careful to pick the right value so you're not accidentally like lightening up an area that you don't want to. I'm not going to use that brush. I'm going to use this brush. I'm just going to get, the first thing I like to do in color key is really just get a good sense of light and shadow. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to block in my light and I'm going to block in my shadow. Warm, cool is a good way to go. Bring up the saturation a little bit here. See how that works. Why don't I just load that layer? That way, when I'm in here, I'm going to be painting only inside that selection of that closest building that I've got here. Just scribbling in those values, and I'm just giving myself some reference. Obviously, like I said, if I'm going to be modeling this in 3D, I'm going to be lighting it in 3D. The 3D is what's going to give me the accuracy. A lot of this stuff, I'm going to explain a whole process on how I'm going to go about. You can already see right there. It's already coming to life quite a bit. There's a whole process on how and why I'm going to be using 3D on a environment like this, where a lot of my other work, honestly, 3D is not the best way. You can do it a lot faster, especially when you're talking about production. Production is a dangerous place to be if you're trying to experiment and come up. Well, I mean, in some studios you can have a little bit more time to make those experiments happen, but to be honest, I'd rather, in certain production situations, 3D just is a little bit too slow, to be honest. You don't have time to model. You just have to start photo bashing and just moving quickly. So that's kind of the reason. In this case, I'm going to be reusing elements. I'm going to model elements, reuse them, be able to replicate them, create a very dense scene without actually using a ton of geometry. And let's not to mention this element, this circular giant. It could be a very detailed element, but in 3D, actually very easy to create by replicating pieces over and over again, and again, using 3D presets. Anyways, that whole process is going to be explained in the next video, but for now, I'm just focused on my color key. So in these halftones here, where the blue meets the orange, this is what I like to call in painting. You call it a transition color, at least in traditional painting. Those halftones, those transition colors, let this yellowy orange transition into this blue-green, desaturated blue-green, and it won't get muddy. If you just blended those into each other, they would get a little bit muddy. Sometimes these transition colors, which are they're not super obvious, they allow colors to bleed into each other without getting muddy on you. Describing what the word muddy is a whole nother situation. I'm not quite ready for that right now, but basically just means when colors don't look intentionally placed, when they look like they're bleeding into each other in an unnatural way, and it doesn't look like intentional proper color mixing. That's the best definition that I think you guys are going to get out of this one, because I'm not even sure that there is a real definition of what that means. In any event, I'm just going to go through, load my selections, and I'm going to give a good base. I'm going to give a good base for color, but I'm not going to completely like do all the color with this overlay mode, because it's a little bit, why not? I'm going to switch to why not switch to opaque and then add a little bit to the drawing of it, add a little bit to the design, and figure some other things out while I'm going, instead of just trying to do it all with just the overlay mode. So okay, so the great thing about overlay is that it slightly varies the saturation depending on the value that you're laying it on top of. For example, on some of these lighter values, overlay using the same color is not going to saturate these areas as much as it would maybe an area in the mid-value range or a darker value range. It feels a little bit more naturalistic. If you just use the colorize or the color blending mode here, you'd get a little bit more not stale, that's the wrong word, a little bit more artificial sense of that color overlaying on top of the environment. That's my opinion on that. So we've got that. One thing that I'm going to want to do here is indicate a couple local value changes. So there will be some objects in here that are going to get a little bit, they're going to get their own colors assigned. For example, I might want to have some emergency guardrails in some of these areas here, which are going to be painted yellow. Like a staircase, like an industrial staircase that's running up and down the middle of this whole foreground element here. So okay, so just while I'm kind of messing around here, a couple ideas are coming to me. I'm just going to start talking. So hope you guys are ready to hear me just blab for a minute. There are a few things that I want to address here. So one is, in terms of the city, certain things we're going to want to show what is the feel of our city. Well, if you had to describe in a sentence, it's a good practice to describe in a sentence what is the theme or what's the style of this city, or what's the basically what's the style. It's a good way to say it. So to me, this is like I said, probably 70%. In this view, not really designing out the buildings, but from a broad sense, it's 70% normal looking building silhouettes, and the 30% of the abstract or the alien is going to be what is on the surfaces on top of them. So if you squint and you look at the building shapes, I mean, yes, this is a massive bridge connecting two skyscrapers. They would never do that, but in general, the shapes are not that ludicrous, except for obviously these giant floating pieces. So the style of my city is basically realistic in its essence, but industrial surfaces and mechanically slightly futuristic, slightly more engineered, fantastical elements than we have today. So, for example, this is a building here. It's just a big, giant industrial building with a yellow industrial staircase, which you would see in a lot of industrial buildings. They'll use colors to code certain things. They want workers to be aware of certain things, and they'll paint them yellow. They'll paint them red. Like, you can look at images of a car factory, and you can get that sense pretty quickly. But yeah, so that's the general feel. But then beyond that, we're going to have a lot of there's going to be some sort of Japanese Gundam sort of looking things in there. A few of those kind of things, because that's just what I'm into. So you'll see a little bit of that, and then there will be probably at this point, I'm guessing, can't say what percentage of it, but there'll be a small percentage of things that are just kind of wacky, interesting shapes that are, more abstract buildings that will be off in the distance, or maybe somewhere, I'm guessing, in this region. This building is not going to be too abstract, but maybe some of the stuff in the distance here might get a little bit crazy and abstract to kind of go with these larger floating generator nuclear reactors, whatever they are. And so that's I guess that's a really long description of what the feel is of my city, but architecturally, it's all going to relate to each other. It's all going to have a little. The key is everywhere should have a little bit of that industrial feel. Some areas are going to feel more corporate or more, or not as for industrial purposes, but you generally want to have a little bit of that in a bunch of different places so that we can relate those all together. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to put a little bit of local color in some areas, and I'm going to knock that all down. I actually don't like that at all. I hate that. I thought I would like it, but I don't. Sucks. Anyways, this area is working out for me. Just a little bit of this yellow industrial sort of staircase, yellowy orange, running down the center there, almost like you could walk up like 50 stories straight up in through the middle of this building with various levels of overhangs and things like that. What you're going to have there. So, okay. Honestly, overlay-wise, I think we just did a lot. That just did quite a bit. I think what I'm going to do now is I just want to add a little bit more of this kind of warmth to the environment right there. Almost like, this is what's great about having those selections already made. Select it, select the inverse, and then I can give it a little bit of warmth behind there, behind that silhouette. Like it's just kind of creeping through, peeking through the buildings. Yeah, I think that could be cool. We'll see what's up with that. Anyways, good enough, fine. I'm going to go opaque now, and I'm going to just start adding some more details onto this. Just start carving away at it a little bit. So I want to improve the silhouettes here. So that's basically just what I'm going to do. I'm going to just take it from there. That's a really rough sort of color palette. If you look at that, you can see how 3D is going to give me the accuracy. That's all I need to know. And then from there, I think we're going to get when we calculate lighting in 3D, it's going to give me a much more realistic kind of look. At least more not realistic. I'm not really going for realistic. Like I said, if I was, I could just use a HDR photo and that would be that. But I think what I'm going for is just something fantastical, and we'll get some accuracy from the model, but we don't need to necessarily need to be photoreal in our colors and our lighting. Honestly, I just don't care. I don't think it's necessarily better that it's photoreal. I think sometimes it's cool and it serves its purpose, but this isn't a photoreal thing. This is nuts. This is a big, giant floating nuclear reactor above a city. And you'll see the more I get into the designing of these actual buildings in the next video, you'll see that although they look fairly realistic proportions-wise, and from this perspective, they look, realistic somewhat, but what they're made up of and all the shapes on top of the buildings themselves are going to be completely not earthly, not at all. Going to be all new. So I'm just going to start breaking up these buildings a little bit and start getting into some more of the shapes that we're going to have here. At least carving away at it until it looks right to me.